Today's episode of the Bleav in Steelers show is brought to you by BetOnline. And BetOnline has the Pittsburgh Steelers as a 2.5-point underdog in NFL Week 13, another division game, rivalry game against the Cincinnati Bengals. If you want to place a bet on any of the Week 13 action, BetOnline.ag is the place to do it. Over-unders, spreads, player props. Head over to BetOnline.ag today to get started. BetOnline, the game starts here. Welcome into the Bleav in Steelers show. My name is Mark Bergin. Got a guest today here on today's episode of the Bleav in Steelers show. He is John Sheeran. He is the host of the Orange and Black Insider. Also, go check over his work. You can read it at A to Z Sports as well. John, welcome into the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mark.
We're going to start off with the quarterbacks, and the Steelers have been playing two. Russell Wilson, they've got some packages for Justin Fields. I want to know from the outsider perspective, though. Russ had been playing well his first few starts. Granted, I look at the teams he was playing. What say you, John Sheeran, as someone who covers the Cincinnati Bengals, where it's like, which quarterback would you rather face? How have you seen how the Steelers quarterbacks are doing from afar?
Well, it does appear like this is the Seattle Seahawks version of Russell Wilson. Maybe not fully, but more so than the Denver Broncos version, which I think a lot of Bengals fans would have preferred when they signed him back in March. No, it was crazy back in, whatever it was, like early October when the Steelers benched Fields after that promising start, and he looked to be pretty competent and looked to be overcoming a lot of issues that he had in Chicago. But I remember our old friend Le'Veon Bell, tweeting from the ether about, Russell Wilson's going to unlock George Pickens. And sure enough, the guy was right, because Pickens looks to be completely fulfilling his potential. He still is obviously crazy from at least my perspective, but he's hauling in everything that he's catching, and he's making these acrobatic catches, and it doesn't seem like single coverage is enough to stop him. So just on itself, like, Russell Wilson has given the Steelers the best passing game that I've seen from him since before Ben Roethlisberger's decline. And this is still a team with a really good defense and still an offense line that's good enough to make it work. So that was really the missing piece to turn the Steelers from a team that may sneak into the playoffs of the wild card to now competing for the AFC North. So if you're asking me, I would prefer to see Fields out there if I'm the Bengals, because Russell Wilson, despite playing in the blizzard last week, he's playing really good football.
John, when you tweet, do you tweet from the ether?
Always. It's a hellscape. That's what you have to do.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. I think you hit the nail on the head, and that's what I've been saying. I was wrong. I would have stuck with Fields after the 4-2 start, and it was like, well, why rock the boat now? Clearly, the Steelers at the start of the season wanted to start Wilson because he's a captain. He has the calf injury, and Mike Tomlin knew something that we all didn't know. And really, it's as simple as we talk about the moon balls and everything, but it's getting the ball to your best offensive playmaker, and that's Pickens. And the receiving totals Pickens has when Wilson is the quarterback versus when Fields is the quarterback, to me, that's the biggest difference between the two.
Yeah, 100%. And again, like Pickens was already this athletic freak that had this insane catch radius and everything. And now you're giving him a quarterback that has great deep ball placement and great accuracy and timing, and everything is just now kind of working itself. And you have, the ancillary weapons kind of feeding off that as well. So again, like, at least in recent memory, when the Bengals and Steelers played, like, Kenny Pickett, I think, popped off maybe one or two times and here and there. And, they got the best of, the end of Ben Roethlisberger. So, the pendulum had kind of swung back into the Bengals' favor a little bit. But now this is a variable where the Steelers can match, the Bengals' proficiency in the passing game. And again, the Steelers are obviously going to have the advantage defensively. So that really changes things. And again, it was really unexpected, at least from my perspective. I didn't expect Russ to have this career renaissance, especially with Arthur Smith as his offense coordinator. But that shows as much as how anyone knows, right? What a pairing that's been.
Yeah, the Steelers won both matchups a year ago, but the one that was in Cincinnati was almost like a placebo, John,
Right.
In the aftermath, because that was the first game after firing Matt Canada as your offensive coordinator. And it was like, oh my gosh, we finally have a 400-yard game. And we hadn't seen that in so long. Now, with this year's team, I can understand why you want to play Fields in certain packages. I think that the Steelers need to be a little bit more selective when they do. I liked how they used him in the Baltimore game, but in the Cleveland game on Thursday Night Football this past week, he had a 30-yard run. But other than that, it's like he's not just a wildcat player. What I think the Steelers could do is this, though, because Pittsburgh really struggles to score touchdowns in the red zone. Score about 44% of the time a touchdown in the red zone. That's 30th in the NFL. Conversely, that's something that Cincinnati does really well. Right now, you're scoring on almost 70% of the time a touchdown you get into the red zone. So, like, that's going to be huge in this game. So, when the windows are tighter and you don't have as much field to work with, how do you actually punch it in to get 6? I think that's when Pittsburgh could use Fields and his mobility to force defenses to play an honest 11 on 11.
It's a good point. I think with the Bengals defense, like at least under Rumo in these 6 years, it's been like complete bend don't break. And this year has been kind of the opposite, where you're not getting those clutch stops in those moments, and the floodgates are kind of opening in spots where traditionally they haven't been. And there's a lot of kind of factors that kind of go into that. But yeah, I think with Justin Fields and his running ability, like that's a variable that the Bengals have to account for, especially when you don't really know when it's going to happen, right? Like last week, in the blizzard, all bets were kind of off at that point, and that's kind of where Fields I think took the Browns by surprise. But with the Bengals, whenever you get to the outside of their defensive front, that's when a lot of the missed tackles happen. It's kind of weird where it's like this Bengals defense clearly has issues stopping the run and stopping mobile quarterbacks, but kind of just running up the middle, it's not where like you'll find that success. When you get to the outside, when you can kind of break contain, which I think Fields can do in the situation, that's when you kind of get those plays where the Bengals defense is on their heels and they're allowing a lot of explosive plays. So I think that's definitely a variable where the Bengals have to factor in, and that's where the Fields can be at his most advantageous, if you will.
Yeah, and the concern I have from Pittsburgh's standpoint is like trying to block Trey Hendrickson, leading the NFL in sacks right now, 11 and a half. And this is coming off a week where Pittsburgh allowed 3 sacks in the first half to Myles Garrett. He absolutely crushed Dan Moore Jr., and he was getting some help too. Like that was the thing where it was like, oh man. So Hendrickson comes in as the sack leader. That's been the one silver lining with this defense, because I look at, okay, the good news in the last 3, Bengals defense allowing an average of 31 points, 347 yards per game. I mean, on offense, we'll talk about Burrow and company here in a second, but defensively, Hendrickson's the guy that I have circled where it's like know where he's at on the field at all times, because he could be an absolute game wrecker.
Well, the good news with the Steelers is he doesn't move, right? He's always at the right defensive end, and they don't move him towards the left. They don't move him inside. So it's going to be Dan Moore is going to face him for the most part. And like, there's no reason not to give Dan Moore help in this game, because the Bengals don't have another pass rusher that can win consistently one-on-one matchups. Like Sheldon Rankins was brought in to be that answer. He's now dealing with a viral illness that's been going on for a week now, so we don't even know if he's going to play. And even if he does, he hasn't been the answer that they've wanted at 3 technique as a pass rusher. BJ Hill hasn't gotten a sack, even though he's won at a higher rate compared to Rankins. And their other edge defenders, Miles Murphy, Joseph Asai, Sam Hubbard, none of them can do anything remotely close to what Trey Hendrickson can do. But it is fun watching Hendrickson kind of win in the same ways that he's always done, and people are still surprised by how powerful he is. People think that he just kind of bends around the edge. He's kind of that finesse type of edge rusher, but there's a lot of power in his hands in his lower half. That's how he's able to kind of push the pocket, and he can finish at the quarterback better than 98% of other edge rushers. I think TJ Watt's probably in the 2% of guys who can finish better than him, but that just shows to how I think unheralded he still is in the NFL. And, obviously being the sack leader should give him more prominence to that. But yeah, 100%. If you can somehow limit Trey Hendrickson like the Philadelphia Eagles did a few weeks ago, the Bengals only had like 4 pressures in that game total because Hendrickson was a non-factor, and Jalen Hurts and the Eagles were able to just dice up the Bengals pass defense, which has been their biggest issue on defense. Their secondary is basically toast at this point. So if Hendrickson can't win early, like it's going to be a problem.
You're stepping on my toes a little bit, because that was going to be my next question. Is Lou Anarumo, the defensive coordinator, was someone I thought should have gotten more consideration to be a head coach, and it really has not worked this year with Cincinnati with 4-7 record coming into this game. What I was going to ask you is what specifically has gone wrong, whether it be injuries, whether it be performance, personnel, what's gone wrong with this defense? Because right now the Bengals defense just isn't getting it done.
I really do think it all traces back to Jesse Bates leaving. Like, it was such an issue last year to not have basically a do-it-all free safety that could cover so much ground, that could get guys in the right position. And cornerbacks' jobs would be a lot easier knowing that he was just the literal safety blanket on top of them. So they had issues last year at safety. Like Nick Scott was a starter for half the season. They had a rookie in Jordan Battle, play with Dax Hill, who was obviously not a safety anymore. So they went to this offseason, okay, like we can't get Jesse Bates back. He's gone. How can we somehow remedy the situation? They signed Geno Stone, who had a great game against the Bengals for the Ravens last year, and he had 7 interceptions, thinking that he could do similar things to Jesse Bates in that free safety role. And then they brought back Von Bell, who isn't the same player as he was when he destroyed Juju Smith-Schuster 4 years ago. He's at this point he's physically cooked compared to that younger version of himself. So they thought that those two would be the answer to give them some stability in the back half of that secondary and allow those cornerbacks like Cam Taylor-Britt and Dax Hill and DJ Turner to kind of do their jobs better. And the safety play just isn't anywhere close to what they expected it to be. Geno Stone, I think, is slightly improving as the season goes on, but he's still not where they need him to be. And again, they've been rotating Von Bell in and out of the game with Jordan Battle. I think Jordan Battle is going to be the starter there next year. They want to give him kind of more of a shot, and Von Bell is only here for a year. So just a lack of stability and trust in the safety room combined with Cam Taylor-Britt looking nowhere near where he was last year. He looks mentally unstable, and it's not like he's like athletically cooked, but he's just making all the wrong reads, and like he's just not reliable in man coverage anymore, and teams are picking on him. And he got benched for the second time this season last week for a rookie and Josh Newton, and then he had to come back on the field because DJ Turner, who is playing like arguably their best cornerback this year, he's now potentially out for the year. So it's going to be Cam Taylor-Britt and a rookie Josh Newton out there at cornerback with safeties that you can't really trust. It's just a matchup nightmare for any competent passing offense, which they're going to face this week.
So that's where you kind of attack if you're Russell Wilson, George Pickens and company. And just for any listeners and viewers, Jesse Bates, before the start of the 2023 season, signed a 4-year deal with the Atlanta Falcons. That was coming after the previous year. The Bengals had franchise tagged him. So really, I mean, a 2-time All-Pro safety. So you're talking about, okay, how do you replace that caliber of player? And John, really good analysis there about the Bengals defense. All right. Speaking of coaching, though, what I got to ask, 4-7 season thus far. It's a kitchen sink game for the Bengals to say, if we have any shot of making the playoffs, this is really a must win. Is Zac Taylor coming back next year as Bengals head coach?
I would say right now, yes. And the only way I think he doesn't is if they like lose out, or Joe Burrow basically goes to the front office and says, let's get a new head coach. Like me personally, I believe in the 5-year rule. I think when a head coach and a quarterback don't win a Super Bowl within their first 5 years, it's not going to happen. It hasn't happened for anyone else. I don't know why it would happen in Cincinnati, but I think the Bengals typically do well in December, and there's some winnable games left on their schedule. I don't think this, despite the odds makers saying the Bengals are favorites, I don't think I would put this in the win. We could talk about that later, but I think they'll win enough games to give Zach one more year. I think they'll definitely identify the defense as being the main problem, because obviously, when Joe Burrow's healthy, they're going to have a decent offense, and I think that is an accurate description of it. But obviously, the defense has given them fits all year. It's why they've lost 6 of their 7 close games for the most part. Luna Ruma, I think, is going to be the main fall guy here. So I think they still believe in the culture that Zach has brought. I think that culture has been damaged greatly because there's clearly a disconnect between their best players and the messaging that Zach is continuing to put out there. But I do think that they're going to give him at least one more year in 2025 to kind of right the ship, unless all the wheels fall off and there's clear dissent and there's clear, distrust in the locker room. But I don't think that's going to happen just yet.
You can call me crazy, but here's where I come down on this. So I want to give Taylor the benefit of the doubt, considering that Burrow has had season-ending injuries in two of those seasons that you mentioned. So you've got that. I mean, coming into this year, the wrist was questionable, and that looks like that's shored up because Burrow's had back-to-back weeks of 350 yards plus throwing through the air. Now he's throwing the ball 50 times. But I look at it from this standpoint. It's like, if you're meaning to tell me in the playoffs, who do I fear more, Buffalo or Cincinnati? And the reason why is I think Mahomes is at another level in and onto himself. But then Buffalo and Cincinnati over the last 5 years have been the 2 AFC teams that are right there. It's not that Josh Allen, I actually think he has more talent and more ability than Burrow. But in terms of who I'm afraid of more come the playoffs, I mean, you can call me crazy, John. The playoff game where Burrow got sacked 9 times in a
Yeah.
game and still led his team back, like that's the dude I want to follow into war. So my point being is like, come playoffs, yes, I think Josh Allen is as talented as any quarterback there is in the league, and maybe it's a Buffalo curse, but I have feared Cincinnati more, and maybe I point to, hey, they at least gone to a Super Bowl with this tenure with Taylor and Joe Burrow. That's my 2 cents worth with all of that.
And I think that's fair. And I think you just kind of alluded to the discussion, the debate amongst a lot of Bengals fans. Is this Taylor or is this Burrow? I think if you were to poll the majority of people, they would point towards the quarterback because, yeah, like, well, how much coaching can you do when your quarterback is getting sacked 9 times and he's still willing his team to victory? Like, we've never really seen that before. So I do think that the majority of what makes the Bengals dangerous is on Joe Burrow. And like you said, like they wouldn't be having him throw 50 times a game if they didn't feel like that wrist was fine and they didn't feel like that he could actually do that. And of course, their lack of consistent running game kind of goes into that as well. But they put so much on him compared to 99% of the quarterbacks in the league. And I feel like that's still not as known necessarily. And maybe that is something that maybe is a product of just playing in Cincinnati. But no, you're right, man. Like if they get to the playoffs, like there's definitely an experience and a confidence that they can do what they did before. The problem is, I think the coaching issues are preventing them from doing that, and it's keeping them from getting to where they're going. So it really is kind of a chicken or the egg type of situation. But I think you can put it mostly on the quarterback for getting them there.
Yeah. But let me add some fuel to this fire. Burrow leads the NFL, 27 touchdowns, leads the AFC in passing yards, has more than 3,000. Jamar Chase leads the league with more than 1,000 yards, 12 touchdowns as well. So this offense is cooking. The return of T. Higgins as well, that has helped out. So it's like there are some things offensively that Cincinnati can do to light up a scoreboard where it's like you got to know where those players are at on the field. I do want to keep it with the coaching here for just a second, though. I mean, do any of these names, whether it's a Mike Vrabel or a Bill Belichick, I doubt Pete Carroll would want to come back at this point, but would there be, I mean, Ben Johnson with Detroit, would there be a name to where if Cincinnati does say part ways with Zac Taylor, is there a name out there where you're like, I would want that guy paired with Joe Burrow and company to get things right? Offensively, they're rolling right now, but then to right the ship defensively, is there a name out there who could potentially coach this team next season other than Zac Taylor?
It's really tough. It's why, along with the head coach, is like the Bengals get a new GM, and it's like it's not the same conversation because you're dealing with, I'll just call them a unique front office where your resources are very limited, and it's not the same job. And I think it's very similar with the head coaching position. I think Belichick gets brought up a lot because not only the Burrow and Brady comparisons and pairing that coach with a quarterback, it makes sense. But Belichick has been on record for having a lot of respect for Paul Brown's legacy and I think the Bengals organization as a whole, and that makes some sense there. I think Mike Vrabel kind of is the most logical pairing for me because I've always had respect for what Vrabel is able to get out of those Tennessee rosters, despite having Marcus Mariota. And he gets credit for kind of reviving Ryan Tannehill's career a little bit, but still Tannehill was limited. And it's why they couldn't really do anything as a 1 seed when that team was at its best. And of course, they traded AJ Brown, and things kind of went from there. So I think giving Vrabel a shot with an elite quarterback like Burrow in his home state, I think that's a logical pairing, and just getting a head coach that I think players can kind of fall behind, because if that trust in Taylor's culture and his leadership, if that's kind of failing at this point because the results aren't there, you do need that kind of new voice in there. I don't think Ben Johnson would want to come to Cincinnati. If he turned down Washington this past year, I don't imagine he's going to get along with the Cincinnati front office. But again, that's just one of the pitfalls of this job, and it's why they may not be able to attract the biggest of names. But if you're looking for a head coach who's trying to get back into things, I think Vrabel makes a lot of sense for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, how much of that is revisionist history though with Washington? Because going into the year, it was like, well, Chicago is so much better equipped with Caleb Williams. So like, I hear you with that. Vrabel, remember, an Ohio State guy and also from Ohio State. I think that's a great point. It's something that I'll be honest with you. It's like, oh yeah, that's right. I didn't even realize it, but I know he's on Cleveland staff right now. And it's just like, he's just out there. I look at some of the teams where I'm like, You're meaning to tell me with some of the coaches that are available right now aren't a better fit for some of the teams at the bottom of the league? And I'm talking about the teams that have a even worse record than Cincinnati does right now.
Right. And I agree too. Like Washington got like a new front office and like it's not the same organization as that. I'm still saying that like with joining Cincinnati, there's a recognition that you're kind of coaching and operating with one hand tied behind your back. And I think that's why Zac Taylor, who never called plays before, was never anything higher than a quarterback's coach in the NFL, he kind of jumped at the opportunity to be a head coach. And I do think that he has head coaching qualities. Like I think his management style is kind of where the NFL is going. And I think that kind of led him to, getting ahead of the pack in that process. But still, I think when you're looking at getting in someone to replace him, even with the allure of a pairing between Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase for the future, like that would attract the majority of candidates. And I'm not saying that Cincinnati is a bad place to go. There's just a recognition that this is still a unique, again, I'm going to use the word unique franchise in that regard. And it's not the same as joining the other, franchises who kind of go for it a little bit more.
I could see you're trying to be polite right now. I
Right.
got you. We're a week away until the premiere of HBO's Hard Knocks featuring all the AFC North teams. What's your takeaway? What do you want to see? Is there something behind the scenes? I've got a whole list of bullet points. Take this in any direction you'd like, John.
Oh my God. Specifically for the Bengals, like just seeing the fallout of all these close losses, like seeing how like the trajectory of like, is it just like, oh, it's bad luck, and just like seeing like how the morale just continues to shift after so many just heartbreaks. But obviously, they're starting to film now, and there's going to be like a recap of like the first 12 weeks or whatever. December is typically when like the Bengals start to find their way. And of course, it's far too late, if you're 4-7 necessarily, and you rely on so many other things. But I'm interested to see in how just the locker room kind of responds to how the season has been going. If we can get any kind of insight on Joe Burrow and how he kind of operates, because he's never been with this much access, at least with the Bengals, around the AFC North, like the vibes changing with Jameis Winston, obviously, the Ravens doing their thing. It's such an interesting time in the season for them to start doing this, because they clearly, HBO thought that the AFC North is going to be the NFC North this season, where maybe all four teams are going to be the playoff race, and that's not the case. But it's such a weird time, I think, for the Bengals because of how the season has kind of unfolded. I just want to see what the vibes are, particularly in those private settings where it just hasn't gone, according to plan, and I want to see how they respond.
I know it's coming off a loss, but for me, the whole first episode could just be as much snow footage as they can show from that third game in Cleveland.
Right.
Yeah, it was aesthetically beautiful to watch. I mean, I know Pittsburgh came up short, but anytime there's snow football, I'm like, sign me up. But it's like, I mean, I want to see like how eccentric George Pickens is. I know he's kind of mercurial. Like if he doesn't channel that energy in the right way, it could be very problematic. He's in his third year, fork in the road moment where, from a talent standpoint, he can be as good as any guy in the league. I look across the field and see what Jamar Chase has done thus far in his career. He could do that. If he doesn't play his cards right, you lose the Superman cape of putting on the black and gold at the receiver position. And, you could bounce around the league like, Deontay Johnson or Chase Claypool. So it's like we're in a real fork in the road moment right now in George Pickens' young career. I tend to think he's going to figure things out with the matchup nightmare downfield that he creates for opposing defenses. But it's a big season, and that chemistry he's had since Russ has been the starter has been fun to watch. So it's like, I'm looking at that. I want to see, they could show more of Mike Tomlin giving inspirational speeches, motivating his guys. It's like, I'm ready to run through a brick wall whenever they show that side of him. I mean, from a Pittsburgh standpoint, that's what I'm looking at.
It's Pickens is just so bizarre to me, because like obviously he's just so animated and he's very energetic and everything like that. And I do wonder if like
goofy sometimes.
Right. And it's just, and sometimes it's obviously very hard to control that from a coaching standpoint. But I do agree that like just the fit with his quarterback, I wonder if that has maybe almost calmed him down a little bit. Maybe not. Maybe I'm just kind of speaking out of turn here, but like just the stability of knowing that like, hey, I have a quarterback that I can trust and I can kind of lock in a little bit more. But you don't want to lose all of that, tenacity and that, freedom that he has. So I'm interested to see how that goes as well.
Yeah, I want to see more of Jameis too. I don't think he's been overexposed. And it's just, you know what? And from Cleveland standpoint, they're having a lousy season. And it's just like, some just Jameis in front of a microphone. I'll tell you this right now. He's going to be a terrific commentator if he chooses to be once his playing career is over. It's just whenever he has a microphone in front of him, I don't know what's going to come out of his mouth. I don't know what he's going to say, but I'm tuned in and I'm listening.
He is by far like the most hell yeah first overall pick of my lifetime, because obviously the 30 for 30, go kind of speaks for itself. But like
volatility, man, just like you never know what you're gonna get.
Like I think there was a point where people were kind of tired of Jameis, like the eating the W, like it came off as just like bizarre and weird. And so like I hope we're not at an inflection point where it gets annoying with Jameis, because obviously there's an innocence in his eyes about playing in the snow and praising the Lord and everything that kind of comes with his persona. I hope we don't get tired of it, and I hope that Hard Knocks doesn't kind of oversaturate us with it, because right now it's in a good spot. And obviously for Cleveland, the vibes couldn't be more opposite between him and Deshaun Watson. So in that sake, I'm happy for them.
Yeah, December the 3rd, Hard Knocks will premiere the HBO series featuring the AFC North teams. John, I wish you a happy Thanksgiving. If there's anything you need to plug, you want to talk about your favorite Thanksgiving foods, the floor is yours. I appreciate your time this morning.
Well, thank you very much, Mark, for having me on. Bengals and Steelers typically doesn't happen. Like I feel like the first meeting typically doesn't happen this late, but better late than never.
Don't get me wrong, John. That was to say that's coincidental for Hard Knocks. Like, come on,
right.
The league had to have planned it that way.
No, but I mean, this is a rivalry that transcends my time doing this job. Like, my mom is one of the biggest Steelers fans that I know. Like, her family was born in Pittsburgh. Apparently my grandfather, I don't know if this is 100% factual or not, but apparently he was the first water boy in Steelers history back in the 30s. I don't know if that's just like made up lore or something, but he was a huge Steelers fan. So this rivalry runs in my family, and it's always very, I don't want to say toxic, but tensions can rise and whatnot. But my mom has also kind of fallen in love with Joe Burrow, so she has a soft spot for what I do and the team that I follow. But other than that, man, Thanksgiving this week, my family doesn't have mac and cheese at Thanksgiving, and I just realized this, like, it's one of the best sides in Thanksgiving history, and we don't have it. So I'm taking it upon myself to actually make it this time and provide it for the rest of the family. And my dad has been a proponent against it because we never had Thanksgiving. We never had mac and cheese at Thanksgiving before. We're not going to start it now. So like, Dad, I'm going to make it, and you're not going to have any, and everyone else is going to enjoy it.
Are you just doing the craft, or are you going to do like with baked and like had the breadcrumbs as well?
It's going to be baked. The cheese is going to be shredded. There's going to be seasoning in it. It's going to be everything that he hates. So,
hey, if I show up in Cincinnati, don't be surprised come Thursday, John.
You'll have a plate. You'll have a plate, man.
Love it. He is John Sheeran. Want to thank him for his time, and you can go check over his work. You can read it, A to Z Sports, and also the co-host of the Orange and Black Insider. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Bleav in Steelers show. I want to thank today's presenting sponsor, BetOnline.ag. If you enjoyed listening to Bleav in Steelers, Apple and Spotify, leave us a 5-star review. On YouTube, hit that subscribe button to the Mark Bergin YouTube page. Enjoy NFL Week 13, Steelers and Bengals. I'll be live with post-game reaction here on this feed immediately following the game. My name is Mark Bergin. Thanks so much for listening. Enjoy the rest of your week. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.